Day 699 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 377,000 military personnel losses, which represents an additional 920 in the past 24 hours. Then as for hardware losses, 22 tanks, a staggering 56 APVs, and a mind-blowing 51 artillery, with lots of recent activity on the map. So we'll move across to the map and we'll start out in Russia momentarily at Bryansk, as we recently got an updated glimpse into the Russian Volunteer Corps operations from a couple of days ago, as they ambushed a Russian Ural truck inside of Russia near to the border, as this paramilitary unit of Russian citizens are still very much a very real threat to Russia's border security. Then also for Russia, General Winter has come to town, or continues to come to town, as we continue to witness more and more unmaintained Soviet-era infrastructure that's reached the end of its many decades lifespan, coupled with those who maintain it in much shorter supply around the country. But infrastructure old and new alike are having issues like this water tower in Chelyabinsk that, as the residents tell us, is only a year old. Then we move to the north, as in the wake of the recent gas terminal explosion in Ust-Luga, the Kremlin did seemingly retaliate after all by way of pledging more preventative defensive measures. So not exactly what you'd expect to hear from a 3-day special military operation. And one air defense system was indeed spotted in St. Petersburg of the Leningrad Oblast, as the Kremlin currently pays special attention to keeping the people of St. Petersburg and Moscow happy, especially considering the current tensions with the war at hand. And these cities are not just Russia's biggest, but also where the mood of the country can be felt the strongest at. But having said all that, they had to pull this spotted S-300 air defense system from somewhere, as Russia is now increasingly becoming more concerned about the defense of its key strategic assets back home too. Then we move to Ukraine, as a massive air attack occurred earlier today, with Ukrainian air defenses shooting down 15 Kh-101 cruise missiles, 5 Iskander-M ballistic missiles, and a Kh-59 air missile. Of note, all of the 15 Kh-101 cruise missiles were shot down. And one of those missiles was in fact taken down in the north by some Browning MG fire. Then we take a closer look into Ukraine, as there were 86 combat clashes during the day across the entirety of the front lines. And do take note, the AFU has already dug its own version of a 3-layer Sorovikin line defense system with trenches, mines, and underground command posts across the whole front of about 1,000 kilometers. Then we'll head to Avdiivka, as Russia continues to attempt advances in the southeast of the town, but not without great cost. And they attempt these movements, particularly in the private residential sector. And it was also noted that the Russian Zenit army base near the M3 remains disputed, although Russians are present in the area. Then also, there were some recent stats specific to the northern flank of Avdiivka, stating how the AFU knock out 13 vehicles for every one they lose. And with further added context, Russia is losing its fair share of tanks in this region, whereas for Ukraine, that type of loss, a tank, is an extremely rare occurrence. With most commonly the case actually being that the AFU loses their older Soviet armor, much more so than their NATO-provided armor. Then, taking a bit more of a general look in the south and the east, and somewhat in the west too, in the last day, We saw a lot of Russian armor getting disposed of, so particularly Bakhmut, Krinky, Avdiivka, and some parts of Zaporizhia as well, as Russia has recently been making some really concerted efforts with newly shipped in armor, that is to say, newly shipped in old armor vehicles, which go through almost zero quality control. And we know this from countless Russian reports, which then lend themselves to a very ineffective outcome for the Russian forces. Then, a favourite for most is always the tank losses, including this abandoned T-72 tank that received a drone-dropped munition package to make it unrecoverable by the Russian forces later on. Then we move across to the Western Front, to Kherson, as despite significant losses, Russian forces do not stop trying to take or knock out Ukrainian forces from their left bank positions on the south of the river here. In fact, during the past day alone, the Russian forces made 10 unsuccessful attempts on Ukrainian positions along the south. Then, at the same time, Ukrainian soldiers actively continue to inflict losses in manpower and equipment on the occupying troops, continuing to exhaust the enemy along the entire front line located here. Then we move a bit to the south as we noticed activists of the Yellow Ribbon movement who hoisted the Ukrainian flag on a mountaintop in the temporarily occupied Crimean Peninsula for Ukraine's annual Unity Day celebrations. And good spirits they are in, with the message to say that, quote, "Soon we will decorate the entire peninsula with blue and yellow flags," so said the activists. Then we'll head across to a quick bit of news for the day. So, recently elected Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk arrived in Kyiv for his first time pledging unity with Ukraine, stating, quote, "Poland will do everything to increase Ukraine's chances of winning this war." Then, in some more political statement news, the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov used his microphone at the most recent United Nations Security Council to say that Russia has never refused negotiations on Ukraine and is ready for those negotiations, but not to keep the current leadership in Kyiv in power. So he wants to talk and negotiate with Ukraine and Kyiv, but not speak with the leaders in Kyiv? I don't know. Then he went on to say, Russia started the special operation not against the Ukrainian people, but against the criminal regime in Kyiv. Then he went on to finish off with a classic empty threat, urging people to listen to what Russia's position on Ukraine is while there is still time. And it is interesting how Ukraine proposed a near-identical peace plan contingent on replacing the Russian criminal regime and a complete withdrawal of the Russian army from Ukraine. So I find it comedic how Russia's playbook in so many ways is always a copy of someone else's playbook. No originality. Then moving across to another Russian military mobilization blunder segment, a little bit of a different one here. So, the life of a Chinese contractor in the Russian army is not all it's cracked up to be, so it turns out, as he states how he's exhausted, there's no rest for the wicked, he can no longer take care of himself, he wants to terminate his contract, he's trying to get in contact with the Chinese embassy, and also that the concept of actual medical treatment or a hospital is an absolute joke, as that really doesn't exist. Then moving across to a quick lighter segment. So as you can see here, a cat warms up in a Ukrainian defender's jacket. You only really need to look at how the Ukrainian people treat their animals to know who's on the right side of history. Then as for a second lighter segment, and definitely a bit of a joke, not the first one created, but probably the first one to actually fly so well, as we saw the efforts of a katana blade strapped to a Ukrainian FPV drone. And who knows, maybe it's the future of close combat warfare. Then, as part of a much shorter video today, to round it all off with, we'll get onto a funny here. So, this is St. Petersburg. The work is being done, money is being paid, so check out this guy using his weed whacker with just patience, complete and utter patience in the snow. But in truth, he's either a drunk or probably paid his employer off to keep him listed as busy and away from the front lines. Or maybe those assessments are accurate on both accounts. So that's it for today, guys. A super short, quick video, nowhere near as in-depth as I'd wanted it to get into, but time constraints, limitations for today and possibly tomorrow, but should be back to regular schedule after that. And yeah, thanks again for watching, supporting, liking and commenting, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.